Welcome to Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. Tonight, a special episode where we take a closer look at crime scene evidence and how blood can hold vital clues.
I peeked inside. There looks like there's blood all over the floor, man.
In the bathroom, there was spatter stains.
On the wall, there were 4 little finger marks. It would indicate at that point he's still alive.
And how investigators use what is referred to as blood spatter analysis to find out the truth.
And an RCMP expert on blood pattern analysis took the stand to describe part of the police investigation into exactly what happened.
The bloodstain pattern evidence in this case, I believe, was instrumental.
And when does it risk leading them astray?
Members from the St. John Police Force arrested Dennis Olin and charged him with second-degree murder.
Bloodstains on Dennis Olin's jacket had the DNA of his father, Richard Olin.
In this case, there was no disagreement about the evidence. The disagreement was about what the evidence told the court.
The difficulty is that the jury is left battling it out between the experts.
This is the story blood tells.
Vancouver Police Emergencies.
The back door is open. Man, I think there's blood everywhere. I'm going to assume you need police and ambulance, man.
Yeah, 1 second here.
Thank you.
And as I got closer to the stairs, there was a very bloody footprint on one of the steps.
I peeked inside. There looks like there's blood all over the floor, man. I hope I'm overreacting. I hope it's just, I don't know.
I don't have the words to describe the state of the house, the struggle that happened in the house.
Forensic specialists have spent hours going over every part of both the outside and inside of this home. One officer is a blood spatter specialist from the RCMP, called in to help process the scene of this double murder.
Catastrophic injuries, one of the more bloody scenes that I've seen, actually. I entered the residence. There was blood throughout the residence, an extreme amount in the kitchen. Evidence of transfer stains and swipes in the living room. In the bathroom, there was spatter stains, evidence of transfer stains that have been altered with water. And with bloodstain pattern analysis, it's a constant evaluation and reevaluation process of what takes place at these scenes. I wanted to get into bloodstain pattern analysis because I was interested in the puzzle-solving aspect of it. I was intrigued that you could go to a scene after the fact without outside data and recreate the events that took place simply based on the blood and the bloodstain patterns that were left behind.
On Friday, 2 days after the bodies of Diana Ma Jones and Richard Jones were found, police provided an update on the case, saying there is nothing to suggest this double murder was anything but a random attack.
So they had to establish where these people were located and potentially what kind of injury they were suffering from, as well as determining some of the movement of the suspect and some of the activity within the scene. So stain selection becomes very important in a scene like that where you're dealing with multiple victims. If you take a very specific bloodstain pattern called an impact pattern, it's an object striking a source of liquid blood. And if I have enough spatter with similar directionality, then I can start to extrapolate where the source may have been located within the scene. As well, there were pattern transfer stains of gloves located on the wall. So somebody wearing gloves contaminated with blood coming into contact with the wall. There are lots of scenes that I go to where it's very clearly a frenzied attack. There's probably some alcohol involved, maybe some drugs. Not a lot of forethought has taken place. An argument has broken out and things essentially got out of hand. When you start seeing pattern transfer stains of gloves or latex gloves, then it's a pretty good indication that there was some planning involved prior to the event taking place.
Chilling testimony from the first veteran Vancouver police officers on scene, who said they saw a knife and hatchet outside the victim's home.
Reporter Romina Dea was tracking developments as the investigative team used the bloodstain pattern analysis to help make sense of the crime scene. And by combining the sergeant's findings with the other evidence collected, to ultimately piece together a possible sequence of events.
The killer enters through the front door, slits the throat of Ma Jones, then hacks and slashes her husband more than 100 times.
Romina Dea spoke with the team commander of the Vancouver police investigation. We have agreed to conceal the staff sergeant's identity because of his current unit.
They saw lots of blood, pools of blood that was drying. Obviously scenes of some sort of a struggle, drag marks. Basically the entire floor, walls with spatter of blood. They followed the drag marks into the bathroom, and where they found two bodies in the shower stacked up on top of each other.
It appears Ma Jones dies quickly after her carotid artery is sliced right inside the front door. According to the evidence, her husband suffers massive blood loss. The killer continues cutting even after Jones is dead.
Richard Jones would have had to have already been bleeding at that point in order to create the large pool on the floor, and bleeding significantly to create that much pooling. And then the directionality and the orientation of the spatter that was located on the wall would have directionality consistent with coming from an area of the pool, which was of course close to the level of the floor, or on the floor.
All over his body, back and front, legs, arms, head, torso. I don't know if there's a part of his extremities that were not touched. I believe that. Certainly if he was conscious at the time, he would have been in lots of agony and pain, there's no question.
A 25-year-old Vancouver man is now facing murder charges. Rocky Rambo Wei Nam Kam is facing 2 counts of second-degree murder.
Maybe today you're not ready to talk about the whole ugly story, but at least say you're sorry.
For what?
For what? You're an animal.
I believe the bloodstain pattern evidence in this case helped solve the crime because it demonstrated fairly clearly that there was at least some foresight or forethought from the accused. He had apparently gone out and bought the supplies beforehand, purchased the gloves, so it helped demonstrate that this wasn't just an entirely random event that took place. I had provided expert testimony for the bloodstain pattern analysis, and there was a conviction for first-degree murder for the murders of Richard Jones and Deanna Ma Jones. When I go to scenes, I just examine the bloodstains, and I use that to solve the puzzle of what happened there. And often it's the only witness that's left, other than perhaps a suspect, to explain the events that took place there.
Coming up, bloodstain pattern analysis helped Vancouver prosecutors get a conviction. Can it help Calgary police find a missing little boy and his grandparents? That's after the break. On this special episode of Crime Beat, an in-depth look at how investigators analyze bloodstains. And no case has more urgency than that of a missing person. This is the story blood tells.
Nathan, God is taking care of your soul, and Mom and Dad need you to be brave right now. to whoever has Nathan, please find it in your heart to drop off our little angel, Nathan, to which he can be rescued and reunited with his brothers and his family.
We know you are our superhero, and I just need you to stay strong, and we are going to see you. We're going to see you, and we love you so much.
This desperate plea for help came 2 days after the Amber Alert was issued. 5-year-old Nathan O'Brien missing, along with his loving grandparents, Alvin and Kathy Lickness, who he'd been visiting for a sleepover on June 29, 2014.
We don't know the motive behind this. Right now, we have 3 individuals who have disappeared under suspicious circumstances.
Police are trying to find out if any items from the Lickness home are still unaccounted for, and that's why they're interviewing all of these people. Basically, they're looking for just any single piece of information that could help them find Nathan O'Brien and his grandparents.
We were examining the house and we couldn't find a point of entry, so we were wondering, did the person, is it a friend or associate of the family who came in, who was invited in, or was already in the house when this happened, rather than a stranger coming in?
Calgary police calling in several experts, including Sergeant Jody Arns.
So I started with the Calgary Police Service in September of 2006, and then I transferred into the Forensic Crime Scenes Unit, where I have been for the last 11 years. And my training currently specializes in bloodstain pattern analysis. We go in and we examine the bloodstains and the patterns that are visible, the different size, shapes, locations, how they are. And it's through the examination that we can actually paint a story and kind of determine where the origin came from. It was a multi-level house, so there were quite a few levels in the residence. The bloodstains were contained on the main floor, the second level, and then the first lower level, where the garage and family room area were. In this particular case, we used LCV. It's leucocrystal violet, and it's a chemical that we spray in areas that we believe there is blood stain or if there's been a cleanup. And we'll spray this chemical and it reacts with the heme in the blood, and it'll turn like a dark purplish blue color if there is blood present. It is just a presumptive test, but it will give us a blue visual. So once it was sprayed within the kitchen, there was footwear impressions that became more evident, as well as there were swipe marks consistent with a mop or like a cleanup in the area.
We submitted that to, it's called SICAR, the Shoe Image Capture and Retrieval Database. And they were then able to tell us what kind of make and model of shoe that was. It's a system owned by the RCMP in Ottawa. So we knew fairly early on what kind of footwear we were looking for at the crime scene.
Arns said it was clear someone was injured, but who and how bad was difficult to determine.
The unfortunate thing about doing blood stain is you still have to analyze the blood to get a profile. So at that point, all I could say is, yes, you do have several areas of impact, but I can't tell you if all 3 have been injured, if 1 has been injured, or if there's multiple offenders, right?
The Amber Alert was still on. Investigators looked to Sergeant Arns for insight.
They were still trying to determine if anybody was still alive or if people would have died. So they asked me if I could basically give them a preliminary report. And on the 2nd of July, I actually attended with the medical examiner as well, with Dr. Brooks Lim.
There's one blood stain in particular that both haunted investigators and gave them hope all at the same time.
On the stairwell from the main level up to the 2nd floor, there was a linen closet kind of at the top of the stairs, and on the wall there were 4 little finger marks. So it would indicate at that point that it was a small person or a child that would have left that handprint there. So to me, that was the only positive thing about it, was that, okay, the child was moving, so it's a good possibility he's still alive.
The lab results came back. DNA matches to Alvin, Kathy, and little Nathan. And by this time, police had a suspect, 54-year-old Douglas Garland. He had a connection to the missing family and a criminal past.
Global News spoke with Alan Lickness, the son of Alvin Lickness and the brother-in-law of Douglas Garland, the person of interest in this case. He tells us that Douglas and Alvin had business dealings until the work ran out, and as far as the family was concerned, the two hadn't had contact in about 7 years.
Police then learned that Alvin's son, Alan, was in a common-law relationship with Garland's sister. They were now searching Garland's farm.
Senior Constable Ian Oxton spent 2 years working on this case. It took that long to go through the evidence recovered from the Garland property. He said from the moment he entered the farm, he was met with one horrific discovery after another. In the basement, investigators found key evidence that tied Garland to the footprints found in blood at the Lickness home.
We found the shoebox, big bright yellow shoebox in the corner of the room, stacked on other shoeboxes, but it was the Delta size 13 that we knew was at the crime scene. The shoebox itself didn't contain the shoes, but at least we had the box. We had a link between the crime scene now and that room.
Another horrific discovery would be a hacksaw. And a warning, details in this case are disturbing.
Although it appeared clean, forensic tests revealed both Nathan's DNA and his grandfather, Alvin's DNA, on the saw.
Well, that to me is the threshold where it's, okay, well, this is now moving to a recovery and not a life-saving event, once those results came in.
Oxton told jurors about an area known as the South Burn Pit, where the cadaver dog had indicated.
The pieces were the size of a thumbnail, and they were just burnt, very fragile pieces of material we could quite obviously it was burnt flesh.
Douglas Garland was formally charged with 3 counts of murder.
During the trial, jurors were reminded of the bloodstain pattern evidence pointing to a struggle in the home and Nathan's handprint on the wall. The Crown argued all 3 were confined and taken against their will to the property where they were killed.
It's hard to describe just how tense it was in the courtroom as we waited for the jury to come back with the verdicts. You could have heard a pin drop in that room, and then just overwhelming emotion as one by one the jury read out the verdicts, finding Douglas Garland guilty of all 3 counts of first-degree murder.
Douglas Garland appealed the convictions. Alberta's top court has upheld all 3 counts of first-degree murder. His sentence was also deemed fit: life in prison with no chance of parole for at least 75 years. The family continues to find ways to honor Nathan, Kathy, and Alvin. And for Sergeant Jody Arns, this case is an ongoing reminder of the importance of her work in bloodstain pattern analysis. Coming up, a case where the bloodstain patterns help rule out self-defense. Welcome back to the story Blood Tells, a special edition of Crime Beat, where we examine the role bloodstain pattern analysis, or BPA, can play in determining criminal intent. We now return to the story Blood Tells.
One of the main functions of a bloodstain pattern analyst is to look at the images and photographs or patterns at a crime scene and then interpret or classify them, okay? Try to say this is the type of pattern it is and this is the type of mechanism which may have produced that pattern. Another aspect of bloodstain pattern analysis has to do with sequencing. So sometimes you can look at patterns and you can say, well, this occurred before something else. I'm a 3D forensic analyst, and what I do is use 3D technologies to help solve problems at crime scenes or for crime scene reconstruction. Okay, so to set this up, what I'm doing here is I have to put some blood here in the center. So this is a blood stain impact rig, and what this does is creates repeatable patterns, or at least creates repeatable impact in terms of the speed. There's a piston that drops down. Now I've already placed blood in this particular area. 3, 2, 1. So here we have our impact pattern. So we have to look at the individual stains and we have to look at the overall pattern altogether. Now if I go in and I start changing other things, so for example, if I drop the piston from a higher level here, it's going to increase the impact force and the impact speed. This person has 3D motion trackers on their body, so we're mapping the motion, right? And then as they swing, there's a tracker on the rod as well, so we know where the rod is in 3D space. Cast-off analysis is when, for example, you can project blood from a swinging object. So basically, if I have a baseball bat and there's blood on the end, and I swing that bat, you're going to have blood which eventually lets go or gets projected off of the tip of the baseball bat, let's say. In the case of an impact pattern, you have some kind of a source of blood. And so if there's something on a person's body or a source of blood or a little pool of blood and you hit it with a baseball bat, now that will create an impact pattern. So those are the two differences between the two.
A woman was found murdered in a Best Western hotel room. Police attended and found a bloody scene.
Police said that they responded to a report of a woman who needed help, but she had already died by the time they arrived. Tejwant Danju is accused of killing Rama Garavarapu. Danju was arrested a short distance away, and police say the two were known to each other.
Thomas Watts was part of the investigative team.
At this particular scene, there was blood located on the ceiling, on the bed, on the carpet, on the walls, on the side of a microwave. So essentially it suggests that a prolonged event had taken place within this hotel room.
For police in Kelowna, British Columbia, back on July 22nd of 2018, they would come to discover that the bloodstain pattern they were looking into at a horrific murder was caused by a wine bottle.
The spatter stains would confirm that the deceased was located at the level of the floor at the time that she received her injuries. And a lot of the times that can immediately take away any sort of argument of self-defense. There's intent there when somebody's located on the ground or on the floor, and you strike them until they die, essentially.
And an RCMP expert on blood pattern analysis took the stand to describe part of the police investigation into exactly what happened.
The blood spatter evidence played into this case and was useful because an impact pattern was located and examined, which gave a very specific point within a 3D environment that the deceased had received her injuries, as well as movement of the accused after as he left the apartment. So it filled in some of the gaps that might have been lost had we not attended.
Sergeant Thomas Watts testified that the gray pants with a big red stain on them were consistent with the wearer kneeling in a volume of blood. They matched the front desk agent's description of what Danju was wearing on the night in question.
The bloodstain pattern evidence in this case, I believe, was instrumental.
The defense is now arguing that he should be found guilty of manslaughter, that he was diagnosed with a delusional jealous disorder and believed Garavarapu was having an affair. However, the Crown argued that Danju did intend to kill Garavarapu. The prosecution says the victim died because of a vicious and prolonged attack. The autopsy showing 52 different injuries, including many lacerations to her head and neck.
So the bloodstain pattern evidence and the location of the impact pattern, which put the deceased on the floor at the time that she received her injuries, was, I believe, instrumental in securing the second-degree conviction for murder.
Quite pleased, because I was under the impression that it was going to get a manslaughter charge, and that would have been quite disappointing. But after hearing a lot of the evidence and, you know, the words coming from the judge's mouth, it was a huge sense of relief.
Coming up, a murder trial that puts the experts to the test, and making the case for using 3D technology to get more objective results. That's after the break. Welcome back. The controversy surrounding bloodstain pattern analysis and the role it played in a high-profile murder case of a wealthy businessman. We now return to the story blood tells.
In terms of interpretation of blood pattern analysis, you can have different interpretations. You can have two witnesses who see the same evidence and come to different conclusions. And I think that in and of itself shows you the difficulties with this type of evidence.
When you have a very rigid and very well documented scene in 3D with good photography, you can perform a very, very accurate analysis. That doesn't mean that, it's like DNA or that it's like fingerprints. Unfortunately, people may abuse that, or they don't follow a scientific method. Maybe they overstep their bounds and they say more about bloodstain pattern than they think they know. There are other factors even indoors. If you have a surface that will sort of is hydrophobic, for example, where liquids just don't stay on, or something that's very absorptive like a sponge, right? That's going to have a big impact on the final result. As an example, fabrics. It's very difficult to interpret bloodstains on fabrics.
If you're just showing where the blood is, that's science. If you're using that to extrapolate opinions about what happened, that can become problematic depending on how far those opinions go. There's a difference between investigative evidence and trial evidence. When the police arrive at a scene, they don't know what they have. So any good police officer is going to throw all of the investigative tools at the crime scene to understand what happened. That's a completely legitimate technique and one that should be encouraged, because the whole goal is to try to understand what happened. There's a difference when you get to trial. The issues are different. The Olin case is a really interesting case to study, I think, because you have the two trials with very different outcomes.
Police are investigating a high-profile murder mystery.
In early July of 2011, police in New Brunswick confirming a well-known businessman found dead was murdered. The St. John Police Force not saying how Richard Olin died, only that he was the victim of foul play.
But St. John police are keeping a lid on information, saying only that Olin likely knew his killer and it was not a random act.
He expired after what I would categorize as repeated blows to his body, and I'll leave it at that.
And in the absence of details, speculation is rampant.
And there's a lot of water cooler conversations about, well, who could it have been? What could have happened? What are the details?
Richard Olin was found in the morning when the secretary went to work, laying in a pool of blood. Was Richard Olin ambushed? Was he seated looking the other way when the blows began? The analysis of the bloodstains showed that, in fact, the bloodstains radiated 360 degrees around the head of the deceased. In fact, evidence on the top of the desk shows that the deceased was struck while seated in that chair, then moved to the floor. The spatter on the floor verified that it was in fact impact spatter. So number one, there was a great amount of force. Number two, there was a lot of blood present for these impacts to create spatter that would have radiated onto the assailant as well as onto the scene around the assailant.
Police searches have been conducted on or near the property of Olin's son, Dennis Olin.
That's all I can tell you is that the Major Crime Unit is executing a criminal code search warrant.
Richard Olin was part of the business elite here. At 69 years old, a member of the Order of Canada. His only son, 45-year-old Dennis, is an investment broker who shared his father's passion for sailing and read from the Bible at his funeral.
The evidence showed that his son, Dennis Olin, may have been the last person to see Richard alive.
Dennis Olin, late in the day after work, around 5:30, 5:45, 6-ish, went to visit his dad, in his office. And from that point on, the police investigation focused on Dennis because he had seen his father the evening before.
Members from the St. John Police Force arrested Dennis Olin, the son of Richard Olin, and charged him with second-degree murder.
Court documents filed by police allege Dennis Olin was struggling financially. He owed his father more than $500,000. Their relationship had been strained for years. The court documents also claim a payment from son to father bounced 2 days before Richard Olin was killed at his St. John office. Court documents also allege that blood on the jacket he was wearing matches his father's DNA.
There were 4 tiny, or not readily visible, but very small stains on the jacket of Dennis Olin that was found in his closet. These blood stains on Dennis Olin's jacket, in fact, had the DNA of his father, Richard Olin. There was evidence introduced that the jacket was dry cleaned. There was evidence introduced by the dry cleaning person that when they received the jacket, they didn't notice anything on the jacket. Those tiny spots were inconsistent with the evidence at the scene, showing that there would have been a great deal of blood present. There were 35 blows to the person's head. 5 of them were blunt force, 30 were sharp force instrument. The weapon was never located in this case. But because of the evidence on the deceased, we were able to know that it was a short-handled weapon, which put the assailant very close to the deceased.
If you're in proximity with a short-handled implement, bashing somebody in the head, and they fall to the floor, they're on the floor, you're still striking them violently, then they become like a fountain. The blood gushes out.
As the blows were struck, spatter then goes in all different directions. It's possible that when a blow is struck, that the weapon can be forward, causing the blood stains to go forward, or the weapon can be angled backwards, causing the angle to go back, the blood to go back onto the assailant. In this case, we could tell, in fact, that some of the blunt force injuries were created at an angle like that, and it verified the idea that the blood stains would have gone onto the assailant. So that evidence helped us to reconstruct what might have happened in this case.
The police, in the sworn document to obtain the search warrant, stated that one of the reasons they should be allowed to invade his residence and seize his clothing is because 2 police experts said that the perpetrator of this crime, given the blood at the scene, given what we see with our own eyes, this perpetrator should have significant amounts of blood on their clothing. They got their search warrants, they seized my client's clothing. There wasn't significant blood on any of his clothing. What was interesting, and what I used in cross-examination, was that in search warrants after that, the word significant disappeared. So now the experts only expected to find blood stains on his clothing, okay? Which is an example of what we call tunnel vision or confirmatory bias. In other words, if the evidence doesn't fit your theory, you find a way to keep your theory alive even though the evidence no longer supports it.
Coming up, with a man's freedom on the line, how reliable is bloodstain pattern analysis if the same evidence results in 2 different interpretations? Dennis Olin is charged with second-degree murder, accused of killing his own father, Richard. A key piece of evidence is blood on Dennis's jacket. His lawyers argue if he was the assailant, shouldn't there have been more? Here now is the conclusion of The Story Blood Tells.
It began last summer, one of New Brunswick's longest criminal trials. Police had gathered hundreds of pieces of evidence, perhaps none more crucial than what he wore the day his father was murdered. Dennis Oland at first told police he'd worn a navy blazer, but surveillance video showed him wearing a brown jacket before visiting his father. And afterward, this jacket was sent to the dry cleaner. But police tested it and found 4 areas of blood that matched his father's DNA.
In the second half of a 5-hour interrogation, skeptical St. John police officers repeatedly accused Dennis Oland of murdering his father, Richard.
Dennis, given our conversation, there's no doubt in my mind that you did this.
Did what?
You had involvement in this death. And I want to know why.
A murder trial that has captivated much of New Brunswick took a dramatic turn today. Dennis Oland, accused of killing his father, took the stand in his own defense.
At trial, he faced the question head on. Mr. Oland, did you kill your father? Oland replied, no, I did not.
In the Dennis Oland case, there were 2 trials.
One was a jury, one was a judge. Both had blood pattern analysis evidence in it. And because that evidence is subject to such widely different interpretations based on the exact same evidence, it shows in itself the problems about how the evidence is vulnerable to bias.
A criminal trial is storytelling. Each side has its version to tell. And in so doing, they present witnesses that will, in fact, bolster their version of events. The difficulty with witnesses who are, in fact, attached to one version or the other is that the jury is left battling it out between the experts. And in the Oland case, that's what happened.
I testified at the first trial of Dennis Oland as well as the second. There was a difference in opinion from the bloodstain pattern analyst who did the analysis at the scene and gave evidence for the prosecution, for the Crown. He did say that he would expect to see blood on the assailant, but he could not say how much blood would be on the assailant. I differed by saying that there would be a significant amount of blood on the assailant, enough to be visible.
Blood spatter is a well-recognized area of forensic science. There's an international association. It does its best to apply the rules of science to blood spatter evidence. That doesn't mean experts can't disagree. In this case, there was no disagreement about the evidence. The disagreement was about what the evidence told the court.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. The jury deliberated for almost 30 hours before delivering a guilty verdict.
Today, Dennis Oland walked to court for the last time before learning his fate, guilty of second-degree murder. A circumstantial case involving a wealthy family with a high-powered legal team left many expecting an acquittal.
I'm shocked. I think most people in the St. John area will be shocked, including most lawyers I know.
The family did not signal it will appeal, but is considering its legal options.
A jury found Oland guilty in 2015 of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for at least 10 years. He served about 10 months before the appeal court quashed his conviction.
In the result, his instructions on a key piece of the evidential puzzle are fundamentally flawed. We are therefore compelled to quash the conviction and order a new trial.
The evidence presented at the trials was similar. In fact, the only difference may have been that a more thorough presentation of the evidence was provided to the judge in the second trial. And the physical evidence, I think, played a significant role in the second trial.
On one of the most dramatic days of the trial so far, the Crown and defense went back and forth, trying to determine just how much blood got on the killer of Richard Oland. RCMP bloodstain expert Brian Wenzel told the court under direct examination Even though the scene was covered in hundreds of blood spatters, it is not definite that the killer would have been covered in a significant amount of blood. Under cross-examination, Wenzel did admit that he would expect the assailant to have been hit by a large amount of spatter, but in his time as a pattern expert, he has seen bludgeoning cases where the perpetrator has had very little blood on them.
The Crown expert, Brian Wenzel, ultimately, in cross-examination, he had to concede that there should have been, because he was one of the two experts that was referenced in the search warrant document. So there, he's referenced as somebody who supports the idea that substantial spatter would be found on the clothes. It's kind of hard for him to then disagree that, yes, that was an intelligent conclusion then, and it's an intelligent conclusion now. It's important to understand it wasn't just that there was a lack of substantial spatter on the jacket. The blood spatter evidence, its essential absence in Dennis's life, his clothing, his car, its absence there meant the police were looking at in the wrong place. That spatter was somewhere. It was with the real perpetrator.
Now to a major development in a murder case here at home. A New Brunswick man who had been convicted of killing his multi-millionaire father is now a free man after being found not guilty at his retrial.
I don't really think today's a day to celebrate so much as what I'm hoping is you recognize it's a day to acknowledge the fact that Dennis did not kill his father. Essentially, the basis of Dennis's ultimate acquittal was that the blood evidence did not support his being guilty. In fact, the blood evidence in its entirety supported Dennis being innocent. And that was a significant factor in Dennis's ultimate acquittal.
By the judge's own assessment, Dennis Oland is not free from suspicion, but the verdict at least clears him legally. Justice Morrison described the case as circumstantial, telling the court, "I cannot accept outright the accused's denial of guilt. However, I am not confident that I can accept the Crown's version of events."
That was in 2019. At the time, the former chief of the St. John Police told media the investigation was no longer active, but the force would consider any additional information brought forward. Nobody else has been charged in connection to Richard Oland's murder.
It's a good question how the jury and the judge reached different verdicts, but that's a part of our system. A jury is a black box. It does not give reasons. So my answer to you is that the judge acquitted because the judge had to give reasons and explain the outcome, and there were no intelligent reasons that would have justified a conviction. Blood spatter evidence has value, no doubt about it. The problems arise in what conclusions different people draw from the evidence.
And the problems that we see with science, in quotes, of blood pattern analysis reveals for us a problem or a weakness in the court system. That weakness, in my view, is the lack of depth of scientific training among both judges and lawyers. That's how wrongful convictions occur.
It's far more an opinion and interpretation of the evidence rather than an exact science.
It's often suggested to me in court by defense lawyers that BPA is highly subjective and prone to errors. First, I explain that my role or my motivation is not to secure a conviction. Most of the time, I don't even meet the accused until the day of the trial. I really just want to be as accurate as possible. And I do that by relying on the data that I can measure and that I can observe.
Well, the future of bloodstain pattern analysis has a lot to do with understanding our ability to perform as analysts. So where do we get it right and where do we get it wrong? And so having an understanding of that and what kinds of patterns or what kind of areas cause difficulties is very, very important. And the better understanding we have in bloodstain pattern analysis, the better it is for everybody.
So it is like any science. It develops, it gets better and smarter,
Blood spatter evidence, physical evidence is very sought after. However, it's only part of the package.
Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat for this special deep dive into the world of bloodstain pattern analysis. I'm Anthony Robart. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat. Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to the Crime Beat podcast now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. And for past episodes of Crime Beat, go to the Global TV app, visit globaltv.com, or check out our Crime Beat YouTube page.